Welcome to Kangaroos, the podcast. Rachel, we have a special day planned for our listeners.
We have Nathan Greene, who's principal at Greene Financial Group in Nashville based. He and I go way back, way back.
Like crib days back.
Yes, like infant days back. So it is fun to be adulting and talking business with Nathan today.
So Nathan, welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
All things come full circle, I guess.
That's right.
It's exciting to be here.
So you must have dirt on Rachel is all I really care about.
I would love to say yes to that, but unfortunately, Rachel was actually one of the angel children, and at least as it was presented to me. So I was the one typically getting in trouble, except for prior to the call, she shared a story that I had no idea about of my crib days where she actually did break some rules. And again, I had no idea. Apparently that scared her straight though. And she got her act in line after that.
Yeah. What Nathan's not saying is that we actually have a mafia pact. And so we just don't tell each other secrets, but that's fine. It's fine.
There you go.
Nathan, I'm excited for you to share with us a little bit about finance or financial freedom that we might go into. But before we get started, we've got a question of the day.
Yep. We always start with a question of the day. Today's is, what does your perfect vacation look like? Nathan, you get to answer first since you're our guest.
I love it. I'm going to be pretty simple on this question too. My ideal vacation, maybe this is just a reflection of the state of mind that I'm in these days, but it's one where I'm alone, preferably with my dog, and a cabin in the mountains. Keep it quiet and give me space and give me mountains, and I'm probably going to be pretty happy.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. Absolutely. So I think in the dead heat of the summer, I start craving the mountains. But if you ask me that in January, I start craving the beach. So I really just want whatever weather I'm not in.
Love it. I'm always going to go for the beach. But like you, I'm like, just plop me somewhere with a few books and some headphones and like nice beverages and like leave me alone for like a good 12 hours a day. We can have a nice dinner, but then I want to go to bed and wake up and do the exact same thing tomorrow. So
there's a common theme here, and that is solitude. It sounds like.
Yes. Rest,
alone.
Quiet. There's a theme. Well, okay. That's a good answer. So we also do challenges of the week for our realtor friends. This week is to shoot a reel and post to Instagram some insider knowledge. So today we're going to arm you with insider knowledge that you can help your clients understand about the financial markets and how that might impact housing. So keep listening so you have some things to talk about. Okay.
That's right. Tag us and we'll reshare it as well.
Yep, that's right. So let's get down to it. We ready? Nathan.
Let's do it.
Ready to answer all of our crazy questions? So tell us first about yourself and how Karen came to be here in Nashville. Like, what was that journey for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I am Nathan Greene. I run a small wealth management and investment advisory firm called Greene Financial Group. It got launched in, depending on which regulatory body you ask, either late 2018 or early 2019. But been in Nashville for about 10 years, long time, pretty much lifelong Tennessean, in fact. So born in Memphis, moved away for school, came back to Memphis, and then landed in Nashville in January of 2013. So been here ever since then. On a personal side, retired endurance athlete, turned outdoor adventurer. So, best chance of running into me outside of the office, at least, is in the mountains, preferably somewhere obscure. But at the beginning of my career, I sort of stumbled into wealth management and investment advice when a friend of mine who was working in the back office of the firm that I got started with referred me to the position that I eventually got hired into. It was a career that I really had no prior exposure to, or really didn't know much about it. My original intent was in economics, which is going to overlay a lot about what we talk about today. But specifically third world economic development was the direction that I was going to get into, but was continuing to run into the fact that there was a lot of data and technical depth to that world, but what lacked was some human empathy. And this career presented a really unique opportunity that immediately spoke to me that it was going to be an opportunity for me to merge that desire to get really deep into analytics and data and blend that with the human empathy component that really keeps me motivated on a day-to-day basis. So I worked with that previous firm for about 9 years. It was a fine place to be. I could say good or bad things depending on the day, but at the end of the day, I kind of realized 7, 8, 9 years into it that we started to grow apart. At the end of the day, my core motivator in the position is that really driven to empower wealth success in all of my clients. And our roadblock was that the firm that I was previously with just wasn't the right setting to enable that for all of at least the clients that I continue to work with. So left them in 2018, launched Cairn around the same time, and have been working ever since then. And we have ingrained or integrated that mission into our personality, one where our drive is to effectively empower wealth success for clients, whatever that means. Sometimes that means we are diving deep into real estate portfolios. Sometimes that means we're diving deep into student loan discussions, and other times we're diving deep into questions like how do we transition out of this business that we've owned for the last 35 years and capture the equity that we've built into it. So fortunately, alongside of all this, that role's actually enabled me to step into the role of educator. I'm adjunct faculty at a couple of universities in town and another at a national level, and really get a lot of joy out of that as well. So
yeah. So I want to park there for a second, because as a part of that role, I know that you specifically work with a lot of like medical students and how to manage that debt well. So as an aside, if you're not a realtor listening to us and you might be in med school or have a kid considering that, Nathan would be a great resource and has resources available that we can talk about at the end for people who are navigating that world, which is a complicated one sometimes and an expensive one. So one you want to manage very well. So
I'd love to take a quick aside and just ask one question about endurance racing. My body is not set for that. I have been told that it is more of a mental thing of just don't quit, right? One foot in front of another, just don't quit ever. I don't have that switch. And so what advice do you have for me?
True endurance athletics, right? I mean, there's a tipping point, and it's
like 100-mile races.
Say that again.
100-mile races. What have you done?
I actually haven't done 100-mile races. The longest I went was Ironman distances. And, but alongside of that in college, I rode crew.
Oh gosh.
So we call that endurance athletics, but it's, I think our race is really rarely more than 16 or 17 minutes there. But the thing about endurance athletics is that it's really just a matter of how comfortable can you be in that really dark space in your mind.
Not comfortable at all.
Yeah. It takes some practice. But ironically, you got to be comfortable with being there to practice being there, and you got to practice being there to get comfortable being there. So if you can't practice because you can't get there, then you're not going to get better at it. And so it's this thing that the good news is we're all adults here. So the simple question is like, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. You got to make it to tomorrow and do your best to do that. If you can get a jog in during the day, great. If you can lift a weight during the day, then great. But for me, it was one of those that it got to the point that it was such a driver that it skipped over being healthy for me.
Sure.
It kind of became an obsession and took over my life. And, at the end of one race, I looked back on my life and realized, oh my gosh, I've not done laundry in 6 weeks. And there's literally no food left in my fridge. And I can't keep up with actual life balance, and realized that's probably
not running
right.
away from your laundry.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that was when I realized that's unhealthy. Let's go back.
Let's come back. Right.
So wealth management. Let's talk about
wealth
that.
management. Let's talk about that a little bit. And maybe we could start with maybe like a week or so ago, you had posted about a blog about the housing market and the impact that we're seeing with just the Fed changing rates. It feels like daily. It's really not happening daily, but it feels like often the rates are changing. There's a lot of, we can call them rumors, right? Swirling of a recession that's coming and sort of doom and gloom. And so what I thought would be super helpful, especially for realtors who are really navigating this space all the time with clients, right? Because that obviously a rate changing by 2 points affects affordability. So housing affordability has changed. If you have a client that has been shopping for a while and they started this process, back in the spring and the rates were at 4 and now they're almost to 6. I mean, that changes a payment and changes like some first time home buying options and affordability, especially in a place like Nashville where, we see property increases nationwide in terms of cost really be about the 5 to 8% mark. But Nashville has actually been 24% in the past year. So that's mind boggling for all of us who have lived here for for a decade or more. That just seems crazy. But so you're navigating this. So first, let's break down maybe parts of your blog where we're talking about like why this particular moment in time is different than what we all refer to as the market crash, or especially housing market crash of 2008 and 9. So how is this different?
A lot of things that I can respond to and what you just introduced. Everything from interest rates driving up to the recession that is kind of expected. But to the pointed question here, how is this different than the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009? And the joke response that I give a lot of people is that, for one, maybe most importantly, everybody sees this coming. There's one data point that I referenced in the blog post actually was that this is the most anticipated recession that we have ever seen in history, as supported by Google Analytics and data that is suggesting that everybody is searching for the word recession. And this is purely anecdotal, and this is purely my own gut instinct. I'm not referencing data on this, but typically when we all see something coming, what tends to happen is not that thing, or not as bad as the world thinks it may be. But to get a little bit more in depth about the technical differences between today and what we saw in 2008, we've got to understand the building blocks of our economy being supply and demand. And both of these scenarios are, in fact, being driven by inflated demand that are resulting in increased needs for the supply side of our economy to keep up. So in 2008, what happened was there was a huge demand for housing because corporations were healthy, corporations were hiring, people were moving around, and importantly, more people in the economy were actually able to buy houses. That was because, and this is the real difference between then and today, that was because of a fundamental restructuring in the banking system that specifically allowed people that previously wouldn't have been able to buy houses based on income or job situation to actually step into those. These are the subprime mortgages. So what happened through these subprime mortgages is that now all of a sudden there's a huge flood of new people, or we've all seen The Big Short, or read the stories about people who got mortgages in their dog's name. So we're going to the point where it's not only new people getting mortgages, but new dogs getting mortgages. So all of a sudden, when there is a system that is enabling this huge new demographic to buy houses, then the rest of the system thinks, great, there's an increased demand for the houses. And so the supply side of the equation has to work to keep up. But then when we realize that these subprime mortgages come with ballooning interest rates and huge payments, and all those dogs and people who shouldn't have gotten mortgages in the first place then can't keep up with their mortgages, what happens is they have to default on the mortgage. And what happens on the back end of that is that when they've defaulted on the mortgage, the financial institution who lent them the money doesn't receive that money. And when they don't receive the money, they don't have earnings. So when that corporation doesn't have earnings, they can't employ that next person. And so they let that person off, which means that person can't then make their mortgage payment, which hurts the financial institution, which means they don't get the earnings. And we end up in this downward spiral that perpetuates itself over and over and over again. What I'm pointing out is a fundamental break in the economy that was driven by people getting loans that shouldn't have gotten loans in the first place. And that source of the inflated demand in 2006 and 2007 is dramatically different than the source of the inflated demand in our economy from 2020 and 2021. I mean, gosh, it just created an entirely new set of social rules and expectations. And man, we all lived through, we're now calling it the Great Migration, where we're recognizing immediately that we don't have to work near our offices. We can work from home. And so if we're working from home, we get to choose where our home is going to be. Moreover, to the point, when we're working from home, we start to realize that we don't like being in that close of quarters with all the people that we live with. And so please, can I get a little bit more space here and a little bit more space there so that I can have my office while my children are screaming, right? So we've got these new demands and new expectations, right? Rachel is clapping hands and realizing this is truth, right? So all these new realities motivate. So we have the extra motivators, but at the same point, we expected 2020 and 2021 to be catastrophic financially, but it wasn't on the economy the way that we expected, largely because of a lot of stimulus. Now, granted, we knew when the stimulus was issued that there would be that would catch up to us, and we're certainly living through it now, but we kind of paid it in advance. But all this stimulus effectively meant that corporations didn't have to lay off workers the way that we expected. And even those that did get laid off still had other job opportunities elsewhere in the economy. So we saw a huge shift of people had been working in service industry and started working in tech industry. And so all of a sudden, it's not that they are unemployed, they're just differently employed. Similarly, those who weren't able to find jobs did have stimulus to keep them supported. And so all that meant that people did have money and people wanted new houses. And so therefore people bought more houses. And all of this driver is, I mean, again, going back to the core components and building blocks of our economy, it's all built on supply and demand. We had supply, and demand for everything we just talked about skyrocketed. Now, at the same point where supply was in the pandemic, it was really difficult to move up along with the increased demand, largely because of, well, you can only build a house so quickly. Particularly, you can only build a house so quickly when we're running out of lumber and we're dealing with all the structural problems in the supply side of the equation. And so supply was sort of stuck where it was. Demand kept going up, and as demand went up and supply couldn't keep up, this is what created Nashville. And I mean, as much as we're surprised about Nashville seeing 24% increase in prices over a year, that's not far off of the national average, all because supply couldn't keep up with a skyrocketing demand. And the skyrocketing demand was driven by households doing fairly well for their incomes. So what we're expecting to happen to solve this problem that's really the fundamental mismatch between supply and demand, it's not a fundamental fracture in our system. It's just there's higher demand than there is supply. The solve there is dramatically different than the solve to that downward self-perpetuating spiral that I described in 2006, 2007, all the way into 2009, right? So there's a whole lot more that I could say on that monologue, but I'll kind of pause on that. Is that at least a good stopping point to highlight the distinction between the two timeframes?
Yeah. So for me, I read The Big Short and watched the movie, and that was the best explanation I've heard yet. So thank you for that. I think there was a lot of fear in 2008 because it came on quick, and now it doesn't seem to be as scary, but yet we are still fearful of the looming recession. And so how can we temper some of that anxiety that we're feeling of, do I buy a house right now? Do I not buy a house right now? Is demand going to go down, or is the market is changing from just a few months ago? And so what advice would you give to a hesitant buyer?
Yeah, I think the motivation, the motivation behind the question is a really important distinction. Not your question, but your hypothetical customer. Like, why are you trying to buy a house? Are you buying it for an investment? Are you buying it for a long-term investment? Or are you buying it because you literally need space to separate from your husband to keep a healthy relationship? And the answer to that generates totally different outcomes, right?
Right.
And I think one of the things we'll end up talking about today is kind of the consumer-driven nature of the real estate market that is relatively unique to real estate market in contrast to, let's say, the stock market or even the private equity market or the bond market that is almost purely investment driven or even institutional driven. Well, consumers look at, not only consumers, but the housing market by definition is sort of a use asset, not necessarily a consumption asset, but it's certainly a use asset. And so if you're in a scenario where you need a house and you are looking to buy a house and you are intending to hold the house for 10 to 20 years, then the answer to the question you're asking just doesn't matter. Who cares? Does the market go up or down in the next year? I don't know. Don't care. If I intend to keep it for 10 years, you'll be fine.
That's right.
That's what I know.
So my dad's been a stockbroker for half of his career, and he would always talk about emotional buyers and sellers. And you're like, you can't be emotional when you start dealing with this. And so I assume, similar to an investment side of the real estate world, you can't make emotional decisions.
Yeah, no, that's very accurate. But even to acknowledge the emotional concern and respond to the emotions with some economic context, I guess. Everybody is particularly afraid of this recession, and internally we are challenging ourselves with our own outlook frequently, daily, weekly, certainly monthly, where we're looking forward and trying to anticipate what's the outcome of what we're stepping into. Keep in mind, what we're stepping into is an economy that is defined by high inflation, as we just described in the real estate market, right? Demand was high and supply couldn't keep up. That's not unique to the real estate market for the last 2 years, by the way. That was seen everywhere in the economy. It's just that real estate's expensive and we all wanted it, and it's a big purchase, and so we all very much notice it. But if you really think about it, we've seen it everywhere. And so as a result, in order to solve inflation, the Fed is trying to control the supply and demand equation to bring it back in line. Now, the Fed can't control the supply side of the equation. There's too many external factors. There's a war in Russia and Ukraine. There's supply chain constraints in China. There's still supply chain constraints in the United States, where we're kind of reverberating from all the past 20 or 30 years, where we worked on our manufacturing industries to really hone efficiency, trying to save a penny or half of a penny or a fraction of a penny for every item produced. Over the last 2 years, when we have a hiccup in our system, it costs everything. We shut down an entire line because we can't get one microchip. And now we're all kind of reeling from that and recovering. And so it is. Point is, governmental agencies can't fully control the supply side of the equation. So they're limited to focus on the demand side of the equation. Since demand is higher than supply, the solve is reduce demand. How do you reduce demand? But by reducing the amount of money that's around in the environment. Two different ways that they can do that. One is by raising interest rates. We keep talking about this. But the other that is actually, in my opinion, more powerful, it may not be as directly affecting what we're talking about in the real estate market today, but that is controlling money supply. That is to say, the Fed literally buys and sells assets. They don't control the printing of money and how much is actually in circulation, or rather how much is printed each year. They control how much is out in the economy. So the Fed may decide, great, I'm going to buy an asset. And when they buy an asset, somebody who sold that asset gets the cash in their pocket. And when they get the cash in their pocket, what do they get to do except for turn around and say, cool, I've got cash in my pocket. I guess I'll spend it. Or maybe I'll invest it. Or maybe I'll buy real estate. Or I don't know. I'm going to do something with it. Point is, when people or industries, entities, corporations, financial institutions get cash in their pocket, that cash gets deployed. The inverse is what we're about to see, though, where all these assets that the Fed has bought over the last few years, the Fed is now starting to sell back into the economy. So when they sell the assets back to the economy, what happens when all that cash is gone from your pocket and it doesn't go to your teller at Frothy Monkey? It doesn't go to your neighbor who's trying to sell their house. It's not a even change of money in the hands of the economy. It is literally removed, parked off to the side, and sits at the Federal Reserve's bank. And maybe someday we'll see it again, but it's gone from circulation for the time being. So when there's less money circulating around, people are just going to spend less. That's from the top all the way down to the bottom. So the good news to all of this is that those in charge are keenly aware of the problems at hand. And those who are controlling this are doing everything that they can to maintain the two different sides of the Fed's responsibility. Their job is twofold. One, to maintain stable prices, inflation. Two, to maintain maximum employment. You can imagine that the levers you pull to optimize either kind of oppose each other. But the point is that the Fed has maintained maximum employment for a really long time and is now going to have to work to stabilize prices. But they are not excited to do that at the cost of maximum employment. So they want to keep people working and people in jobs. And again, going back to supply and demand, particularly for the Middle Tennessee environment that we're in, as long as corporations are still hiring, as long as people are still moving to Tennessee, there still will be demand for housing. While there is indication that a lot of corporations are slowing on their hiring programs or maybe even pausing the hiring programs for the time being, there's little indication that as of yet, we've got lasting concerns with the hiring plans.
Yeah, I saw the Amazon shut down. Should we be nervous about that?
When they made plans to come to Nashville and all these other locations, right? This was pre-COVID that these plans were made.
Right.
And so when the world fundamentally changes, and we all have seen that happen in terms of, like Nathan had already talked about, like the space you need to do your work has changed fundamentally forever. Like we are in the new normal. It's not going back. I mean, it will swing because the pendulum always swings back and forth, but we have developed a new normal, which is hybrid work environments. Right. And so Amazon is, because they're a massive corporation that also invests money in real estate. So we're talking commercial now. Like, is that a worthy investment, or can their money now be used to improve infrastructure within their own systems and retaining employees? I think it's a shift of maybe how they spend their money. But not necessarily, not that they don't want to invest in these particular locations. So I think they're just reassessing how to spend their money and how to invest their money in real estate. It might be warehousing instead of office space. You know what I'm saying? I think it'll be interesting to watch that particular company. I mean, not that I'm an expert by no means, but we'll see.
You're definitely right about that. A lot of the real estate management companies and real estate investment companies are changing their tone on whether they're bullish or bearish, optimistic or pessimistic on the real estate market. There has been sort of a shift in tone there. But, at the end of the day, again, what's our motivation here? If we are looking for a home, and this is a long-term home, then realistically, it just doesn't matter, right? And those people who are pounding the table that all of real estate is just going to be a dumpster fire, I certainly can't predict the future, but I think there's little data to support pending dumpster fire in the real estate market, right? Again, as long as there are people moving to the area, then there will continue to be a demand for housing. And supply is obviously, new supply at least, is slowing down at a state that is likely to keep up with, keep on par with demand, that is.
Yeah. Almost like it's normalizing a little ish.
You know,
I mean, when we say
as one who's not in the real estate world primarily, I hope it's normalizing. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep mindful of time, but let's shift gears a little. And so many realtors are really like sole proprietors, or they are their own small business. And so with that comes a set of financial responsibilities that might be different for someone like that than someone that's working for a corporation who's also like, as a part of me hiring you, I want to give you these 401k incentives, and like, we're going to take care of you in all these other ways. And that's a perk for working for a corporation, because that's part of your package for signing on. So as one who has to think about that for themselves, what are, like, if they're getting started, or if they've done this and maybe not really, they're like, oh, I'll worry about that later. What are 3 or 4 things you could say, like, here's the things that you need to be thinking about as someone who's a sole proprietor, or, your own business owner?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things, one of which is really specific to being a sole proprietor, and then maybe a couple of other things are more specific to being a realtor, mostly sole proprietor realtor, but I think kind of applies across the board. But I think one of the things you're asking about is specifically, if we don't have group benefits, particularly like retirement savings opportunities as a realtor, what do I need to know? And what you need to know is you need to put that in place for yourself. And there are components, or are ways to do that for yourself. Categorically, your options are, you could start your own 401k. Sometimes that's complicated, sometimes that's costly, but simpler options exist, including get this, simple IRA, as well as a SEP IRA. There's and also things like Roth IRAs. These are all retirement plans that the Roth IRA is a purely personal account, but the SEP IRA and the simple IRA are explicitly available to either self-employed individuals or businesses themselves. And funding is kind of calculated based off of your gross earnings throughout the year. So good way to simply open the account, coordinate with your CPA, and say, great, how much then goes into this account? That brings me to what I think is probably what I see messed up most frequently amongst those in the real estate world, and that's derivative of the nature of cash flows. That to say, you don't have a regular paycheck, do you? You don't know exactly what your next paycheck is going to be, or when that's going to be. You may have a lot in the funnel. You may have a lot in the pipeline. You may close 6 things this month, but you may not close anything for the next 2 months. And so as a result, your approach to cash flow within your household may be really skewed. You're dealing with really unique challenges. And the thing that I try to work on with all my clients in the real estate world is finding a way to normalize that cash flow and prioritize decisions on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis in a way that doesn't make your lifestyle so volatile as your paycheck. Because man, an $80,000 paycheck may sound fantastic and may buy you that Mercedes you want. But if it's the only paycheck you get this year, then all of a sudden $80,000 doesn't sound so great. And so, okay, how are we shaping our decisions based off of that? That's the most fundamental thing that I can encourage anybody in the real estate world. And the third thing I will say that's also specific to the real estate world is don't forget to diversify amongst different markets. Real estate is inherently a good investment, but it has its headwinds. It has its challenges, particularly its liquidity challenges. You have to go through a lot to buy a house. And when you want to sell the house, you have to go through a lot to get rid of it. And it is not easy to make happen quickly. There are other markets that are liquid markets that make it very easy for you to get into and out of. And that presents different challenges and different opportunities, but it doesn't mean either one is inherently more or less valid. It's about understanding what you're trying to get out of your investments and allocating appropriately to either, or importantly, in my opinion, both of those different markets. So those are the 3 simple points that I can leave you with. One being, set up your own retirement account. Don't overlook it. Simple IRA, SEP IRA, these are pretty easy to get going into. Find a way to normalize your cash flow, number 2. And number 3, diversify amongst different markets. Use your investments to accomplish the outcomes you're trying to drive towards.
That's super helpful. So if someone has additional questions and wants to ask you all
or
those
maybe
questions,
sign up
how
for
do
your
they get in
course
touch
that you
with you?
teach. Goodness gracious, I'm in.
Yeah. Same. Like, can Andrew and I come and just listen in the back?
Yeah. Listen.
But like,
I'd love a guest coming into the course. Fortunately, one of the courses that I teach is all remote. So yeah, sure. I'll send you the link. I don't think anybody monitors it. You can squeeze in.
Great.
UT won't mind.
Done.
Yeah.
But how do they get in touch with you, or what's the best way of going about that?
Feel free to reach out. My website's a good place to start. Is www.cairnfg.com. Most people struggle spelling that, so hear me out. It's CAIRNFG.com. Or similarly, you could just email me at nathan@cairnfg.com. Would love to hear from you. Would love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, as long as it's positive, please. I'm a sensitive millennial, and would love to help you think through any challenges you got going.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us today. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I hope our realtor friends really find this. I don't know how they couldn't find this helpful. I'm sure they will. And we'll give you all the great feedback that I know that we're going to get.
Perfect.
But we always wrap with a question of the day that focuses on something local. Andrew and I tend to talk about food only. So this one will revolve around food.
Love it.
As a side note, I know now I really do owe you banana pudding. Oh,
it's so good.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's a long story. Basically, Nathan's family was at my house a couple weeks ago, and Nathan couldn't be here. And I set aside banana pudding for his family to bring to him, and then they forgot to bring it. So it's really not my fault or Nathan's. It's theirs. We can blame them. They're not here to defend themselves. Okay. But as a thank you, I'll do that. So question of the day that's local is, what's the best meal you've ever had in Nashville? Where and what was it?
Yeah. Octopus and beans at Moto. A little more obscure, but every time I get in the mood to go out for a meal that I know I'm going to leave with a smile about, I go to Moto and I get the octopus and beans, and it has yet to fail to deliver.
That is so bold and brave, and nothing that I would ever order in my entire life.
Hear me out.
But I love it. It is like so Nathan Greene that like none of that is shocking to me at all. And it makes me just smile deep down inside. Okay, Andrew, what's your answer?
Okay, so my first thought was, man, what was the night that we had the most fun? And that was a simple meal at Adele's, but it was more about the crew that we were with that made it so fun. Adele's is great. Go to Adele's. But there was so much laughter that night with our little group of friends. That is the meal that sticks out in my head.
That's a good answer. Different reason.
Thanks. It's friends.
It's friends. Yeah. I think mine, I don't know. I feel like Nashville is such a food town. Actually, just Tennessee in general. Like, we have Chattanooga that has a great food scene, and Memphis has its own food scene that's wonderful. And so it's really hard to choose. But in Nashville, I have never had a disappointing experience at Butcher and Bee. It is the place that, like, I know, one, the menu changes, and most of the time I order the chef special, which means you get to taste everything. And I love that because it's probably like so many things that you end up eating are stuff that you probably would never have thought to order or try, but I've never not liked anything that they've given me to eat. And they have delicious cocktails. And the whipped feta. I could survive off of that, but that's a whole other thing. So if you end up going to Moto or Adele or Butcher and Bee, let us know. We'd love to hear what you ordered and how much you enjoyed it. And especially if you order the octopus and beans. I mean, that's just like I said, nothing I'd never choose. Next time we're at dinner, Nathan, I just need you to order it and not tell me. And then I'll try it because I don't know that I can get past it. So
Totally understood.
thank you for being here today. We are so
thank
grateful
you.
for your time.
I really enjoyed it. Anytime you guys give me a chance to just talk and listen to myself, I'm probably going to be pretty happy about it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
One last thing, Rachel, what's our discount code?
It's first month 50, first month the words, 50 the numbers, and that gets you half off your first month subscription.
All right, guys, we will see you next week.
See you next week.